Welcome into episode 4 of Hawgs on the Hill, your go-to podcast for in-depth dive into all things Arkansas Razorbacks. Join us as we dissect the victories, analyze the plays, and revel in the spirit of the Hawgs. As always, episode 4 is brought to you by Homefield. Step into the legacy of collegiate style with Homefield's premium vintage apparel. Embrace the spirit of your alma mater or your favorite team with their meticulously crafted, comfortable, and stylish collections. Elevate your game day attire. Celebrate the rich history of college sports. Homefield, where tradition meets modern comfort in every stitch. And you can use that promo code Variety Sports in all caps to receive 15% off that first order. Go check them out today. They got a lot of great Razorback items there, and they're constantly coming out with new things. So go check them out. And we also got to shout out our lovely sponsor and partner, Scarlet Letter. Go check them out. If you live in, Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas area, go check out the Core Tap Room in Springdale, where you can get all the core in-house beers and Scarlet Letter in all their various flavors. And we'll just jump in right here, where a little bit of football news this week as Arkansas landed themselves FCS All-American transfer kicker Kyle Ramsey from Abilene Christian. He'll be a junior this upcoming season. In 2023, he hit 14 out of 15 field goals, going 93.3% with a long of 55. He had field goals good from 55, 54, and 51. And he'll join a kicking room that consists of Matthew Shipley, the transfer from Hawaii, Vito Calvaruso, the redshirt senior that was a Razorback, transferred out and then transferred back, and freshman Charlie Vonderman. And I think we're in for a good old-fashioned kicker battle.
Yeah, I think so too. In my head, I was kind of assuming that it would be Vito's job to lose, but they may kind of pull something where kind of how they did a couple years back, where you have somebody that's a field goal specialist and somebody that's a kickoff specialist, or somebody that's a long field goal specialist, somebody that's a short field. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can skin a cat, but it's never a bad thing to have guys on your roster that went 90% plus the previous year with 15 attempts. I mean, that's pretty solid. That's not a crazy number of field goal attempts, but it's not anything to laugh at either. And hitting 93% of them, that's substantial. So bringing on a little bit more depth there, a little bit more experience. Granted, it's at the FCS level, but I mean, kicking field goals is kicking field goals. You know what I mean? That does translate, at least for the most part. You just got to be sure you're ready for 80,000 fans screaming at you. That might be something that some of these kickers aren't quite used to. But anyways, I was happy to see this pickup, especially considering we're trying to fill some big shoes.
Yeah, that's very true. And, you think at the end of the day, you'd like to see your field goal kickers attempt less field goals. That means your offense is being more efficient and, getting touchdowns instead of having to settle for those field goals. I wouldn't be surprised if the case is your freshman red shirts this year, and then that competition is between the transfer from Hawaii and Vito, along with Kyle Ramsey that's coming in, and then you save your freshman a year of eligibility.
Yeah, I would imagine that's probably most likely the case.
And then sticking with football as we jump over, PFF College released a list of their SEC edge rushers and graded them. 2 Arkansas Razorbacks made that list, and I think you'll be surprised with the one that's ranked higher. The transfer in, Anton Junkaje, is rated as 91.6. And I think they did a disgrace here, giving Landon Jackson a 75.7. I think that you lowballed him there. As you look at what he did last year. He had a pretty good season last year. All the commentators are talking that he made himself some money, and or really surprised that he came back. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I know the grading scales aren't necessarily off of just like previous season stats. There's a lot more that goes into that, just from like footwork and fundamentals. And all kinds of different things go into that grading scale. I agree. I thought Landon was probably lower than he should have been in that list that they did release. I was surprised to see Anton, however you pronounce it, Junkage, something. Not 100% sure. We'll have to figure that one out. But I think he led the SEC actually in edge rusher grading from what I saw. So that was a bit of a surprise. So it's been a talking point over the last day or two, that, hey, do we have one of the best edge rushing duos in the SEC? And we weren't really expecting to have that. Is it possible? It providing a little bit of hope and hype, if you will, because everybody knows what Landon Jackson can do. I don't care what you grade him at. He was one of the premier edge rushers. Now he was even a pretty good run protector as well, in run blitzing, if you will, getting into the backfield and disrupting a lot of those types of option plays and things. So I thought the 75 was a little low. I'd have figured it'd been in the 80 range, but what do I know? I do think that we're in a pretty good spot as far as edge rushing goes. And then you got a couple of guys filling in the middle there that have potential as well. So the defensive line has a lot of potential. I think we still have yet to really see where it's all going to flesh out and how these guys are going to play together and what type of consistency can you get from pressure and things of that nature. Because we had some good snaps and bad snaps last year where we'd have pressure in the backfield almost immediately. We were running good stunts and things like that. And then 2 plays later, somebody had 9 seconds in the pocket, literally, to get a ball off. So trying to find some consistency there is going to be, I think, the biggest key. But bringing in players like Anton, that's how you do that. And keeping players like Landon Jackson, I thought, in my opinion, that was one of the biggest recruits that we got, just getting him to return. So it's going to be an exciting year. And I think we've got a chance to really wreak some havoc and disrupt a lot of offenses out there from the start, just winning battles in the trenches.
Yeah, very true. And we'll dive more in this as we did it last year. We'll go back to it this year, mid to late July, where we start diving into our position, groups where we break down each one week to week and, kind of talk about what starters we're going to have, what depth looks like, and our kind of outlooks for those groups. But yeah, like you said, we could have the potential of 2 dynamic edge rushers there. And, maybe for Landon Jackson, that's chip on the shoulder, fuel for the fire, if you will. And, just continue to motivate him and have an even better year this year. And kind of finally, as we wrap up football news here, this is a big one that actually just, came official today, if you will. The NCAA now has approved a policy change that will allow schools to display corporate logos on their football fields during the regular season games. That includes a single advertisement at the 50-yard line and 2 smaller flanking advertisements. And the goal of this policy change is for the schools to be able to generate additional income to support their student athletes. So initial takes on that.
Well, yeah, we talked about it a little bit already before the show, but I think this was going to have a direct correlation to the legislation that was passed or whatever it was. I don't really know how you want to phrase it. That schools are actually allowed to directly pay the players NIL funds, if you will, and it doesn't have to come from like a donation collective like Arkansas Edge or from a sponsorship deal with a business, if you will, like can't think of the right words. Anyways, so I think that's probably got a decent amount to do with it. The timing of it seems a little bit too close together for that not to be partially the case. I know this is something that's probably been in the works quite some time. And there's actually some rumors swirling that they're going to also allow this for uniforms. I don't know if it will be for football or if it won't get passed until basketball season or whatever the case may be. But there's been some speculation that this could happen for uniforms, similar to like the NBA, for example, how they're allowed to have one corporate logo kind of in the opposite patch location of the Nike swoosh or whatever it is, on the NBA uniform. So I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't take too long for that to happen as well. But, my initial thoughts, it's going to kind of be weird. I think everybody get used to it, especially in the fact that you look and think about like bowl games, for example. A lot of those bowl game fields have advertisements all over them from the sponsors of the bowl game. Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl has the Chick-fil-A logo. And I mean, all kinds of different scenarios like that. Pop-Tart Bowl, which was a fan favorite last year, So I think it could be a point of excitement, and there could be some cool like memes and things come out of this that add an extra layer just to, how college football is every year. There's always crazy storylines and things. So don't be surprised if there's some pretty wild sponsors out there for certain schools. I mean, obviously we expect, a Walmart, a Tyson, a JB Hunt, just because those are kind of some of the big names up there in Northwest Arkansas. But you think about schools all around the country, there could be some kind of funny, kind of ironic, potential sponsors that are pasted on these football fields, if you will, that could make for some fun memes and things like that. So I have mixed feelings on it. Just I think it's going to be a little bit weird, and it breaks a lot of traditions, which, if you're that kind of person, it's probably not the most fun thing. But at the same time, it's the way of the world nowadays, man. The almighty dollar. You got to find ways to make as much money as possible, especially in today's college athletics, where having as much funds available as possible does have a direct impact on the players you're able to get. Maybe it didn't used to in the past, or if it did in the past, it was under the table, but now it is wide open. Everything's fair game. So finding as many avenues for revenue is pretty critical. So I think that's kind of where this comes from.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's one of those things, like you mentioned, that's the way of college football nowadays. And it's one of those things where you either play the game or you get left behind. And, I think so far already, just with kind of the whole situation with bringing Cal in, Arkansas is kind of already getting with that. They're getting these these
Donations.
companies and donors to come in and give more funds to these sports. And, there's a great interview with John Tyson on Hawgs Plus, if you get the chance to check it out, where he talks about how part of his donating, he doesn't just donate it to the big sports like you would think. He said he likes for, some of his donation to go to track or tennis or, some of those other programs that you don't necessarily think about that don't get a ton of love, just like your football, basketball, baseball, the big things, or softball, like your big sports that you really think about. And so that's cool to see that, he expresses that. And so that kind of just gives you an idea. And he even mentioned in that one, like, comparative to what a lot of people think, that he just didn't write some giant check to bring in Cal. He worked with Hunter Yurachek to make sure everything was in line and did what he could do, or his part, if you will, to help bring him in. So it wasn't just like per what people think going around. He didn't just write him a big old check and say, here you go. It was, he worked with Yurachek and the athletics department to make it happen. So
it helps that him and Coach Cal are close friends. I think there was a lot of John Tyson being kind of a liaison middleman at first, before some of the more direct conversations started happening between him and Hunter Yurachek. But all in all, whenever I heard that, it obviously gives a lot of respect, or shows a lot of respect that Tyson has for all of the programs, not just the big ones that they get a lot of the recognition from for being a donor of, if you will. So you think about it too, a lot of those, tennis and golf and soccer, the players in those sports, even baseball, actually, they don't have full ride scholarships half the time. A lot of times they're half scholarships, and then they have to have some form of academic scholarship or something like that to cover the rest of it, unless they cover it out of pocket or something like that. So in my mind, it's a good thing to have as much money going to those sports as possible to kind of bridge that gap for some of those elite athletes that don't get as much recognition just due to their sport not being as big of a draw, if you will. So any ways you can bridge that gap and have people looking out for you, like a John Tyson or a JB Hunt, that all those places that want their money distributed, maybe outside of just the big sports. I've got a lot of respect for it. I also, want the big sports to be supported well, but at the same time, I think some of those athletes have a higher need than maybe, a football player that's already on a full ride, that's already got a stipend or something, like a housing stipend. There's ways the universities have been able to provide those types of things, even pre-NIL and stuff, that there was refund stipends and things like that they were able to supply. That was totally normal. It wasn't a crazy amount of money or anything like that, like some of them are getting nowadays, but there was a lot more avenues for football players, if you will, compared to tennis players. So that's definitely a good thing to see, good thing to hear, and it's a good thing to know that they're supported in ways that helps their education as well as their athletic career.
So true. And so it'll be interesting to see come this fall what logos you're going to see at Donald W. Reynolds Razorback Stadium on the field. And I myself will be interested to see what happens. But I think overall, even though there's some interesting caveats to it, I think overall this will probably be good for your program and to be able to bring in more money to help support these student athletes. And, with that being said, we'll jump over to basketball news where that's going to be where we spend a lot of our time today because, we've got a lot to talk about. And, the biggest news coming out yesterday was Trevon Brazile. He's coming back to Arkansas. I think that's took, a lot of people by surprise. There was talks that he would come. There was a potential of him coming back. I know it was really, I think, between him possibly coming back or Coleman Hawkins, a guy from Illinois that's transferring that tested the NBA waters and decided to come back to college. And, at the end of the day, it ended up being Brazile. And, it really, I think one surprises me, but also I'm interested to see what he's going to do in offense, maybe where it's not specifically or particularly built around him. And then you have other pieces to complement. This is going to be an offense that he's going to be able to be a complementary piece. And I'm interested to see if that's going to allow him to maybe play better or maybe not have as much pressure on him. And then he can go out there, perform, give you 8 to 10 points, 5 to 6 rebounds a night, and be a key contributor and not, go silent for a large chunk of the season and have issues. But also, I think this allows him to, have another offseason of getting fully recovered from that injury. He was a guy that averaged 8.6 points per game last year, 5.9 rebounds, and shot 48.8% from the field and 35.3% from the three-point line.
Yeah, and really those aren't bad numbers. You'd like to see the points per game maybe a touch higher, considering he was supposed to be, one of our big pieces, if you will. I think it is a little bit unfair to have expected some of the things that we did, considering he was having to play the 5 quite a bit when he was on the floor. And I don't think that was something that he's just not built to excel at the center position, really, especially when you get into conference play. And a lot of those guys down low are 7'2", 7'3", 260. They got a little bit of size, a little bit of mass compared to him. Whenever he was matched up with somebody, kind of his size, maybe a little bit smaller, his defensive rating wasn't bad at all. Was phenomenal at shot alterations and shot blocking, especially in those types of scenarios. So I think if you put him in a position like that where he can be maybe a little bit more successful and the matchups fit a little bit better for him, I think he's got potential to be a pretty good ball player in a system where he's more of a role piece, if you will. I think he's got potential to be a star. Don't get me wrong. Like, he really does have that level of potential. But it's just got to be the right fitting situation. And the good thing is this will be a vastly different flow, vastly different offense, I'm sure, compared to, an Eric Musselman type team. So maybe that's the change he needs. I'm not sure. I do know that if he's fully healthy, he can be extremely explosive. And you get him on a fast break, and you never know what's going to happen. And then his ability to stretch the floor and bounce out, hit threes at a fairly decent clip, and then be able to actually, kind of drive in and kick it back out for some other guys to have some open threes. He was able to do that at least fairly well. He's just another piece that you can really roll out there that has a lot of potential, especially if he, like you said, is not the main guy. You've got plenty of other talent to spread the ball around and to spread the defense around on. You're not getting double and triple teamed anytime you get into the paint if you're Brazile anymore. So I don't know. It was strange to hear that he was coming back. I think there may be a little bit something to the fact that Coleman Hawkins was reportedly demanding $2 million or something insane in NIL money. And with all the other guys that we've likely, paid, or honestly, I don't know how all that works. I don't even know how much anybody got. Everything is just speculation. But I'm sure they're like, well, we're not going to give you that. So let's go see if we can get old TB back for a couple $100,000 or something. I don't know. I'm just throwing some BS numbers out there, but I don't hate the fact that he's back, especially in an entirely new situation, entirely new system with a lot of different players around him that I think will be able to share the load better. I think he's got a lot of potential to kind of have a bounce back year for us. And I think there's certain fans out there that maybe aren't the biggest fan of him coming back, but then there is a lot of fans out there that are a big fan of him coming back, and I think he's got the opportunity to be a fan favorite in a sense, just because he's been around the program a couple of years. People know him, people recognize him. He's a pretty funny guy. He's got some cool interviews out there. Go watch those. I mean, he's got a lot of potential to be a really outstanding ball player this year. There's a reason that he was projected to be drafted. It just maybe wasn't where he was wanting to get drafted, and I understand he wanted to come back and develop, and who better to develop under. So I've got high hopes for him, especially fitting in with this team and not having to play the 5 with, you got Jonas Adu, Big Z, a couple of guys that really will be able to hold that position down. I think it gives him the flexibility that he needs.
Yeah, so true. This is going to allow him to play, one of those, the 4, or even a mismatched 3 spot, depending on how Cal wants to run this lineup. Plus, he gets to develop under assistant coach Kenny Payne. And if you think about when he was at Kentucky previously, the guys that he was able to work with there, you think DeMarcus Cousins, Anthony Davis, all the big men that came out of Kentucky, that now Brazile has the ability to learn from under him. And maybe who knows, maybe they beef him up a little bit, find a way to put some weight on him. That way he can hold his own if he does get down in the paint, with some of those bigger SEC defenders. So it's going to be interesting to see how they use him along with, the various other weapons that they have in this offense. And, with that being said, Coach Cal now has his 9-man roster that he was shooting for. And now it's time to see who fills those other walk-on scholarship roles that he kind of has said that the rest of the roster is going to be for. Those are probably guys that are not big name guys that can come in, and if for some odd reason you do maybe have some injury issues, guys that can step up and give you some minutes. But also they're going to be guys that can be able to help this team as far as you think about like a scout team, or, help you, prep for games and things like that. So it would be interesting to see who he decides to bring in with that. We mentioned last week, Arkansas is going to be playing in Michigan Square Garden, or in
Madison Square
Garden against Michigan in the Jimmy V Classic. We now have a date for that. That'll be on December 10th, Tuesday, right as season's kind of right around that kickoff, as end of November, usually season gets kicked off, and then you'll have this early tournament time type, early season showcase. And then another very interesting and a kind of ironic matchup here. Arkansas will play Oakland at home as part of its non-conference schedule this year. And if you remember correctly, Coach Cal, that's who knocked Coach Cal and the Wildcats out this past March, as they were a 3 seed, and Oakland was, they would have been like a 14 seed, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Very low seed. So
14 or 15 or something crazy.
Cal gets the chance to get his revenge here. And Arkansas is
Oakland would beat anybody that night, though, man. They shot like 70%. It was insane.
So true. You had Goki that was, just draining everything. Was insane. But Arkansas is 2-0 all-time versus Oakland, with a win coming in 2011 where they won that game 91-68, and the other win coming in 2006 where they won 91-57. So it'll be interesting to see who else fills up this non-conference schedule. I would be very surprised if you don't see a lot of marquee matchups, big name schools or big time matchups that, Cal wants to get Arkansas on the national stage more than they are already. And I think that's just, example that is playing at Madison Square Garden in New York, one of the primetime spots to play. And then also, wanting to schedule a game in Dallas, with wanting to recruit Texas, Arkansas, St. Louis area kids, Oklahoma, into some other areas. That's the way to do it, is get yourself a lot of TV time and, go out there and win. I mean, that's the 2 key things. You get that exposure. That way these NBA scouts can see what you're about as a player, and then just getting on the big national stage and winning, proving that you can go out there and take teams and, win. So I think that's going to be interesting to see what other matchups we have once they start really building that non-conference schedule.
Yeah, and there'll probably be a handful of other, big splashes, if you will, in scheduling for this year. But where I really expect it is next year, when he's got, a full season to be talking to different teams and things, trying to figure out schedules. A lot of these schedules, you have to have them so far out in advance, planned out on some of these matchups and things. You look at football, for example, dude, we schedule non-conference games, some of the bigger ones, if you will, 3, 4, 5 years in advance. Basketball is not quite that way, but there is some things there that have to be logistically worked out, especially with some of the bigger schools and some of these marquee matchups at a location like Dallas or Madison Square Garden and things of that nature. It's exciting, though, and I think it's the right path, to your point, to spread what Arkansas is all about on as big a stages as you can find, especially in areas that you want to recruit heavily. We'll play some games in Little Rock. That's another place you want to recruit heavily from a basketball standpoint, especially with it being in-state. So getting down there, kind of getting some of those kids to come watch games in person if they can't make it to Fayetteville, for example. But I've got really high hopes that we have at least a consistent 2, 3, 4, kind of big non-conference games a season, similar to how we had Purdue preseason and Duke regular season this past year. I think that was good things for the university, for the sport as a whole. I mean, those games had tons of viewership, even outside of just Duke and Hog fans, for example. That was one of the most watched games of the year, regular season at least. And that only does good things for your recruiting and recognition of the program. So I expect that to be a heavily pursued area of building those types of matchups year in and year out. But then on the flip side, you want to make sure you have some winnable games, some tune-up games, and things of that nature. So it really is all about finding the right balance of, your non-conference matchups. You don't want them to all be just cupcakes, but at the same time, you want some pretty good names in there, but you don't want it to all be, the biggest teams available every single game. So I don't know. That balance is definitely going to be a fun one to figure out how they tackle that.
As I said, it's true. You have those tune-up games where guys can kind of get in the flow and get used to playing together, things like that.
Yep.
But, thinking about it, give me your early projections for starting 5 for this, heavily talented Arkansas team.
Man, so I think you're going to have Nelly Davis, Adu Thoreau, most likely Jonas Adu, and DJ Wagner. And then outside of that, most likely have Big Z coming off the bench. And then your last starting spot, I don't know. I don't know if you roll with Brazile or if you have him kind of as your sixth man and start one of the freshmen that's coming in. The Boogie Flan, the Carter Knox, the Billy Richmond, any of those guys I think could start. Or, like I said, do you roll Brazile out there, a little bit more size and a little bit more experience, and have your freshmen be your rotation pieces? I don't know. I don't imagine Big Z is going to start. I think he is your backup relief center, if you will, for Jonas Adu. There might be some times where you want to roll a big lineup depending on a matchup, and you might have Big Z, Jonas, and Trevon Brazile out there all at the same time. I could see that, and like you said, have Brazile kind of be a flex 3, depending on matchups. I mean, it might work, especially considering Big Z can shoot threes too, so it's not like he has to just live and die down low. So there's a lot of potential to stretch the floor around and do some crazy things. But I would think you're going to go with your experience. Transfers would be your main starters, at least in my mind, unless some of these freshmen are just like straight up freaks that you can't keep them off the floor. They're that good, that force themselves into the starting rotation, if you will. That would be my thought. And so I would think Brazile is probably kind of in that starting rotation as it right now, but could kind of flex in and out as a 6-man between him and Carter Knox or him and Boogie Flan if you're needing Boogie to kind of play point. Or there's a lot of ways it could go, but that's kind of my thought.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think the big thing for me, I'm not going to count out that Big Z won't necessarily start. I think a lot of that depends on his development in the offseason. Because if you really think about it, he only got maybe a handful of games, 10 or 11 games last season before, towards the end of the season after he got, kind of approved to play. So how does he develop this offseason, in his game, but also physically? He's 7'2", So do you kind of bulk up that frame a little bit or keep him kind of a little leaner and have him as kind of a more athletic stretch five? I think that's going to be interesting to see what Cal does with him. But like you said, if you want to roll out a big lineup, like you said, you run out there Jonas Adu, Big Z, Nelly Davis, DJ Wagner, and Adu Thiero. But like you said, I think you're going to see a shift throughout the season. I think you're going to, like you said, you're going to see with your starters at the beginning of the year, probably those more experienced guys transfers, unless one of these freshmen come in and over the summer and just really wow you. But then I think as the season goes on and these freshmen start acclimating to the college game, I think you maybe see them, you know, fighting for more minutes and potentially like a guy like Boogie Flan to come in and help run the point and, have an extra guard out there along with DJ Wagner and Nelly Davis. So I
You
think it
might
could be
start seeing, yeah, you might start seeing later on in the year, like some more split times, like where guys are getting like 20, 25 minutes apiece. It's, and it's split pretty evenly between a Carter Knox and a Du Thoreau, for example. Those guys have similar sizing, similar game. Who knows? I've heard Billy Richmond can absolutely jump out of the gym. So maybe he forces his way onto the scene in certain matchups where you need, an explosive, if you're really trying to play the fast break game. If you're going up against a team that's turnover prone, maybe throw Billy Richmond out there because he's the guy that can really fly up and down the court and just hammer some dunks home and get you some hype and momentum. So I think there's going to be some situational things, and then to your point, later on in the year, once these guys have some chances to develop, you might see kind of a legitimate split team where each of these guys is getting 20 to 25 minutes a night, and it's pretty shared. I don't know. And you might ride the hot hand one night. Some guy might, he might not shoot well at all. He only gets 5 minutes. He's not hitting anything. Pull him, throw somebody else in there. This team will have enough depth to do that. It's not going to be anything, like we've seen last year where there was depth everywhere to where we didn't even know who to play half the time. But I think this team's shaping up with the talent at each position. It's pretty legit. And I actually like the fact that there's not 13, 14 guys that you're trying to figure out your rotation between because they're all kind of same caliber, if you will.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's one of those things where with 9 guys, you're going to have to see a lot of splits because it's going to be hard for, week in and week out guys to play 35, 40 minutes and not, get exhausted or have, potential like get dinged up, banged up, that's going to happen throughout the season. And, that is one thing to mention here. You look at it, Brazile does need to make sure he earns that playing time. I think, like we said last year, the offense was built around him. So you saw a lot of play being forced around him early in the season. Like he was out there really forcing the ball into him. But then as the season went on, that kind of, divvied off a little bit. But I think there's also some maybe other issues going on. And I heard like potential bridges could have been burned between, him and Musselman, but we're not going to speculate there. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see at the end of the day what this offense looks like at the beginning of the season, who starts, and how it evolves throughout the season, and what kind of magic Coach Cal can work. As I thought we had high expectations last year. I think you're miles and miles higher than that this year with just the talent, new coach. There's a lot not going to be riding on, but a lot of expected out of this first season. And I think you got to take a step back and remember this is the first season here. Yes, he brought in a ton of talent via transfer portal and getting, several guys to decommit from Kentucky and come over to Arkansas. But, at the end of the day, I think we'll be top of the SEC. It's hard not to expect that with just the caliber of coach, caliber of players you have. And similar to we were talking about with baseball, that floor of expectations is going to be pretty high. And then the high expectations, a lot of people are probably going to say national title. I mean, it's hard not to look at this roster and think that that could be possible if all the pieces fall into place.
Yeah, like you said, 100% of it's going to be on chemistry between all 9 of these guys. If you have some some weird mixes where these guys just aren't playing well together, it all goes out the window pretty quickly. And that handicaps you on who you feel like you can play. But if these guys mesh well from day one, have a lot of good communication, and then this is something that I was a little bit frustrated with under Musselman, but have a little bit better offensive scheme, maybe a little bit less of the street ball feel, if you will. I think that's something that even when your team chemistry might not be quite there and and you got eyes in the back of your head for a player that runs with you or whatever, how you see certain teams go with players that play together all the time. If you have set offensive plays on a more structured scale than we did the last couple of years, that can overcome some of the chemistry and build it for you that, frankly, I just don't feel like we had it off and on the last few years. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I think it's something that this team's got a lot of potential to utilize more so than we've seen in previous Razorback seasons. So, but all in all, it really all boils down to the players playing well together, understanding each other's tendencies and strengths, and trying to maximize their teammates' effectiveness. And that comes from a lot of different ways. But that's really, at the end of the day, what it boils down to is trying to mitigate your weaknesses and play to your strengths. And good teams find a way to, get those open looks for each other and set hard screens for each other and play the pick and roll well. And the things like that really do require good teamwork and understanding of your other players' strengths and stuff like that. So I think that's where this team's really got to make some significant strides once they're all in the same building together and getting a lot of practices in. That's where this upcoming season is going to be made or broken, if you will. But going back to your point on expectations, it's hard not to think that, you at least need to make it past. You got to make the tournament. If you don't, I could understand, the whole, okay, it was year one, so many new faces trying to mesh together. You didn't have anybody really to kind of build outside of Brazil, I guess, with him being a returner, but it still is all new, all different, so there's not really anybody there to kind of set the tone except for some of the transfers that I've played with Cal before. But even them, it's still so different, so fresh, so many new guys. The expectations have to be, at least curbed to an extent. But on the flip side of that, with how much talent this team has and with the coaches that are there, it's hard not to think that, okay, tournament is definitely the floor. You kind of hope that if you do make the tournament, you make it past the first round and can bust that curse that Cal can't get out of the first round anymore. So if you can check those two boxes in year one, even if you lose in the round of 32, depending on who you play or whatever, that we're getting way ahead of ourselves here. But even if you lose there and don't make it past that to a Sweet 16 or something, who cares? That is a very successful season, especially in season number one. I think that would be kind of the threshold in my mind to say, look, Arkansas is here. They've got a lot of culture that they're building right now outside of what they already had with Coach Cal being there now and some of the players that they have. They just broke Cal's curse of losing in the first round. To me, that would be ideal situation to propel you into the next 4 years of Coach Cal that's on his contract. It's not things that have to happen, but I think it would set you on the right path from year one to have the most meat on the bone, if you will, for the upcoming years after that. So that's kind of my hopes and expectations. Whether they come true or not, we're Hog fans and we know everything goes crazy around here. I would have thought the exact same thing for baseball this year, that there's no way we're losing in our own regional.
Yeah, that's so true. And you think about the end of the day, I think Cal might have some good experience on this. You think as far as getting these guys to mesh together, because you got to think at Kentucky, he was bringing in a whole new starting five every year and still having, a lot of success in making the tournament and things like that. So, that'll be interesting to see what he does in a sense of it's not all freshmen. You've got guys with experience and freshmen. So how does getting those two kind of type of players to mesh compared to when you just have all freshmen coming in and being like, hey, it's new for all of them compared to some of these guys have been there, done that, and these freshmen are coming in and, yeah, they played at a high level in high school, but you're playing in college ball now in SEC play against some physical teams, things like that. So it'll be interesting to see at the end of the day, like you said, how that meshing works with Coach Cal And yeah, does he break that quote unquote curse of not making it out of the first round? And so, glad to see Brazile back. Really love to see the potential that Brazile has. We got a glimpse of it 2 years ago, right before he got hurt, with the dynamic and just, exciting plays. If we get back to that type of Brazile, you can expect several SEC top tens with this talent.
Well,
It's
you
going to
think
be
about it real
insane.
quick too, about that year that he was on a tear. Obviously, he hadn't been injured, and so I think there was instances last year where maybe he was a little hesitant just due to that injury lingering in the back of his mind. Outside of that, though, you think back to year number 1 with us, he wasn't the main guy on that team. Wasn't even really close to the main guy on that team, if you will. I mean, he was, you had Nick Smith, Anthony Black, Jordan Walsh, Ricky Council. I mean, you had a lot of other guys out there that were, offensive threats that weren't named Trevon Brazile. And so I think that's partially why you saw some of the explosive success here and there in those early games before he got hurt. And to your point, that's what he needs to get back to. I think this team has the makeup to allow him to get back to that.
Agreed. And so as we kind of wrap up the basketball talk, we'll jump over to some gymnastic news, as Arkansas Gymnastics did add a grad transfer for themselves in Caitlin Ewald from Illinois. Over her career, she competed in 46 meets, has scored 9.850 plus on bars 19 times, and has a personal best of 9.950. And I think Coach Weber went out and addressed a need. You saw a struggle on bars a decent chunk of the year, and on beam a little bit. Our best routine was our floor routine. So she goes out and adds a very experienced gymnast that can come in and, scoring 9.8, 19 plus times. That's insane in 46 meets. So that's a little under 50% of the time she was scoring at least a 9.8. So I think that's going to be big for this team as they come back next year looking to develop more.
Yeah, and I think this is, like you said, another piece that was targeted to shore up some hot positions. I don't know, event groups, whatever you really want to call it. I'm not the most versed on the vernacular for gymnastics, but I can't remember the other girl's name that they acquired. That was basically the same as this, but for beam, where we really struggled. So that's 2 transfers that we picked up where their strengths were in areas that we had weaknesses last year. So in my mind, those are great pickups. We'll see how it translates to, the team atmosphere and things of that nature for gymnastics for us. But I think that's the approach that you've got to have in the off season, is do the best you can to fill the gaps. And that's exactly what's going on here. So I've got high hopes. I think next year can be another one of those years where we set even more records than we did this previous year, whether that's in attendance or overall top scores. There was a lot of records set for Arkansas Gymnastics last year. Multiple weeks of breaking our own highest, total composite scores back to back to back. I mean, there were some crazy stretches in there where we were seeing tremendous improvement week in and week out. So if we continue that trend, good things are happening in the gymnastics department. That's for sure.
Very true. And, as we continue, I forgot to mention in the basketball segment, we've got 2 former Razorbacks that will be playing in the NBA Finals that start tonight between Jordan Walsh with the Boston Celtics, and you have good old Daniel Gafford with the Dallas Mavericks as that gets kicked off tonight. So, at the end
Somebody's
of the day,
getting a ring.
A former Razorback's getting a ring. Either way you look at it, so that's great to see. And then kind of as we wrap up here, we're going to, some postseason baseball news is Hagen Smith yesterday was named a Golden Spikes finalist, along with Charlie Condon from Georgia and Travis Bazana from Oregon State. With what he did this year, you hated to see his last outing go the way it did, but I think this is rightfully deserved for him. A guy that can come in and, shut guys down and have just dominant outings. And it might be a stretch to see him win this. Those 2 other guys, especially Charlie Condon from Georgia, is really making a tough case to, win that out with just how well he is hitting the ball. But if you can remember correctly, Kevin Kopps that won this a few years ago, he won it over some guys when we weren't playing that continue to be playing. So who knows? Maybe Georgia and Oregon State get knocked out this weekend, and it's kind of a fair field that they aren't continuing to pile up stats as well. But you'd love to see Hagen Smith come away with a Golden Spikes trophy, or he was also named a Dick Hauser Trophy finalist as well. That's your equivalent to a baseball Heisman, if you will. And, you'd love to see him take one of those awards home at the end of the day, or even both. Bring the trophy hall home and, put those in the baseball development center.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think he's got a good shot at least getting one out of the two. To your point, it's Charlie Condon, what he was able to do this year and breaking home run records and just absolutely it seemed like he was consistently hitting off of anyone. I mean, it didn't really matter who the pitcher was. He was getting home runs, he was getting doubles, getting RBIs. I mean, it was pretty wild what he's able to do for Georgia. That said, you got to take into account that Hagen Smith set the record for strikeouts per 9 innings, which is almost unheard of as well in today's day and age. So you really do have some strong resumes there, and you can't count Travis Bazan out. I do think it's between the two SEC guys myself, but at the end of the day, there's a reason that those three guys are the Golden Spikes finalists, is because they did tremendous things on the baseball field this year that hadn't really been done in years past. So it's going to be interesting to see who ends up pulling those trophies home. Obviously I'm rooting for Hagen Smith, but I don't want it to be, an upsetting thing if Charlie Condon pulls it away, because he did tremendous things at Georgia as well. So all in all,
I was about to say, it's hard to ignore guys that are hitting 445 and 415 on average on the season. That's insane. So
yeah, it's unheard of, honestly.
And to think that Charlie Condon was a redshirt last year and hardly played, and then he just breaks on the scene this year. And I wonder if some of those Georgia coaches were shaking their head about, why weren't we playing this kid last year?
Yeah, no kidding. We got some bad scouts or something out here. But yeah, kudos to him, man. I mean, one of the best individual collegiate seasons from a hitting stand, not from a pitching standpoint, from a hitting standpoint, I've probably ever seen. And I know I hadn't been alive forever, but golly, I mean, like, it just was like week in and week out. Oh, he hit 2 more in one game, and then he had a 500-footer in one game. And it's just like, my gosh, man, this kid is just raking all year long. It never slowed down. That's something that you see from time to time as somebody, start the season out hot and then maybe peter off at the end of the year. No, all year
consistency
long. All year long.
Yeah. And then before we get out of here, some fun news for Arkansas baseball is, the transfer portal world is starting to get fired up, with teams' seasons being over, guys kind of deciding what they're going to do, whether they're going to come back or transfer out, things of that nature. One interesting transfer portal athlete that you could hope that makes his way to Arkansas has the same last name as a current Razorback. Vahiva Aloy's little brother, I think this is right, Kahio Aloy, is transferring from BYU after just his freshman year, where he led that team in RBIs and was named to the Big 12 all-freshman team. How cool would it be to have, now it would be 3 Hawaiians on the team, and a brother duo there. It'll be interesting to see if he decides to head this way. That would be something to look out for. And there's several other guys that have been just thrown out there for possible watches for Arkansas. Outfielder, I think something McDowell from TCU, a guy that I think was second on the team in hitting, is transferring out. A guy that you can bring in. We're having to replace our entire outfield depending on what Diggs does. There's a couple other names that have been thrown out there. Just at the beginning, you've got first baseman from Texas Tech, so another Texas Tech guy. Maybe, Hudson, White, and Molina can be like, hey, come play over at Arkansas. You won't regret it, whether they're here or not. But it'll be interesting to see what Dave dials up in the transfer portal and what he does to, make changes to his rosters. We're still going through the process of guys deciding what they're going to do, whether they're going to come back, take their chances at the draft. And even if they do say, I'm going to declare for the draft, with guys that
go, yeah,
if they actually go, because guys that have that remaining eligibility, they have a little bit of leverage there to be like, well, fine, I don't like this deal, I'm going to come back type of thing. So, that's going to be mid-July. So we got about a month and a half until Major League Draft time to see what current Arkansas players, if they get drafted and decide to go, what signees decide to go, things of that nature. And then, we're getting into our dead period, so we're going to work on coming up with some fun discussions over the summer, as kind of everything's wrapped up now. Last thing going on, you've got going on right now, started yesterday and going on today and tomorrow, is the NCAA Outdoor Championships for track and field for men's and women's. They're participating in the Outdoor Championships. That's going on today and ending tomorrow. And then after that, nothing till late August, as the football season will be here. So, we're hitting our off-season portion too, as you will. Just why we cut down to one show a week. Not going to be a ton to talk about, and it'd be really short shows if we tried to do 2 a week. And then,
yeah,
and we have, like we mentioned on our recap show earlier in the week, June 29th, mark that on your calendars. That's when we're going to do another live show at Core, so be on the lookout for that. We're working on some logistics and planning the show for you guys. We're going to have a fun show for you, and it should be another good time, as always, hanging out at Core, getting some beer, and then, those seltzers, and, just hanging out in a cool environment. So put that on your calendars. We'll have a Facebook event out soon, and, up until then, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And thank you for listening to today's episode of Hogs on the Hill. And we'll catch you right back here next week.